Greetings and various assorted salutations. This is another one of my Google Classroom tutorials. Today we're going to be looking at assignments. Obviously I'm not going to cover all the functionality of assignments because quite frankly you can do a lot more and probably a lot more creative stuff with assignments than what I'm going to be demonstrating today. But I'm going to show you how to create a very basic assignment and give you some guidelines, advice on building assignments. So let's dive right into it. First off, we're on the stream page, and what you're going to want to do as your next step is you're going to want to go into classwork. Now, one of the things that comes up right away is if your class is brand new, you might want to create topics first. And the idea behind topics is it's a way of organizing your things into modules or units, something to that effect. And it's just a way of organizing your content. So like for ancient civilizations, when I was building that course, when we were on the ancient Egyptians unit, I had a topic called ancient Egypt or ancient Rome. For like U.S. history, I had World War I unit. I had I'll have like a World War II unit. And so that's one of the things you'll probably want to create right away. And then you just organize the material that you're going to use in that unit in that topic. But since I already have some, let's create an assignment. Now, right away you have this create button up here, and you have several different options. If you want to create a quiz assignment, you can skip right to that. Essentially, quiz assignments, you check this one if you're going to use Google Forms, and then it's just a shortcut on creating forms. Another type of assignment, which is a bit different, I'll talk about that in a separate video, is the question. And then you've got assignment. One other thing that is worth noting is once you have created an assignment in Google Classroom, you can reuse it, or you can make a copy of it and modify it. And so one of the bits of advice I always have is if you build a lot of templates beforehand, you can reuse the templates over and over and over and over. Because really, the big thing about online learning is getting at the content. And the technology is just another tool, just like pencil or paper. And if you're following some standard procedures, students really appreciate that. Because standardization means they can focus on the content instead of trying to figure out how do I get this assignment to work. But for now, let's go into creating an assignment. So right away you get this. You'll need to come up with a title for the assignment, and you can put any instructions you want in here. Let's see here. We'll just call this one sample assignment. One of the things you can do is if you want to post it to multiple classes, you can do that right here. If you only want to post it to certain students, say you have differentiated learning, you can do that here. Let's say you don't have any, you're working over the summer and you just don't need to issue any students. You can ignore this for now. You can set the point value. You can set it at any number or ungraded. If you've created categories, which is done in the settings of the course, you can organize your assignments by categories, and then you can actually weigh those categories. I don't necessarily weigh the categories myself. I create the categories for organizational purposes. If you don't have a due date in mind, don't bother setting it if you're just setting things up. And then this is where you set up which topic it's going to go into. One of the things you see here is originality reports. Last I checked, you get 3 of these. Essentially, the idea of originality reports is, let's say you have a student submitting an essay. If you check that originality report, the Google Classroom then scans their essay to find out is their work original, and if they did plagiarize it, how much of it is plagiarized, and where is it plagiarized from. This is a very useful tool in that regard, but you have very limited use of it unless your school has negotiated more use of it. I recommend reading more on it, and I also recommend if the plagiarization detector actually pulls something up, you look at it before you accuse somebody of plagiarization, because it also assumes that quotes, even if they're properly cited, are pulled from somewhere else, obviously. And so the originality reports just make it faster to figure out where your student's getting information from. And it can be used for that as well. You can also create rubrics as well. I'm not going to go into detail about that today. I'll put that in a different video, but you can grade based on rubrics if you would like. Now let's get into the main things, like how do you put stuff into an assignment. Now you can either add existing things you have. So let's say you have a Google Slides, you want students to go through a slideshow, or you want students to look at a certain document, and it's already in your Google Drive. You can click right on Google Drive. It takes you into your Google Drive, and you pull that document. Additionally, you can put down web links, and so like you want students to use a website as a resource, you can put the link in here. If it is a YouTube video, that is actually filed separately, and you can add YouTube videos as well. You just click on that. So if you want the students to watch a video, you can either search for the video, or if you have the specific URL, you can just punch it in there and it goes through. Or let's say you haven't been using Google that much, but you've got the files already, you can upload files. Now, some people might want to directly upload Word documents. I recommend you take the time to convert your Word documents into Google Docs. It's just easier use in that regard. Now, let's say you don't have pre-existing material, you need to build something. Instead, you would click Create. Here you can create a Google Doc, which is basically Microsoft Word. Google Slides is the presentation program. Sheets is the spreadsheet. Drawings is a drawing app. And Forms is, well, you can do tests and quizzes that way, or you can do very simple worksheets that auto-grade themselves. And I'll talk about that in a bit. Just some personal commentary. I use Docs a lot and Forms a lot for student turn-in materials. I haven't really used Sheets a whole lot, but that's because I just don't need that at this point. I have tried out Drawings. I'm not as fond of it, maybe because it's my social studies background, but I haven't really found a great use for this yet at this time. Sometimes I have had students submit slides, though. But when you click on one of these things, let's click on Docs. It'll create it in here, and then it'll pull up the document. You can make the document into whatever you want and use it here. If you have a Word document, for example, that you want to convert into a Google Doc, this might be one of the easy ways of doing it in-house. So the other thing that you get is with certain types of documents, especially Google documents, you have a choice. You can set it so that students can view the file. You can set it so that they can edit the file, or you can make a copy for each student. Now, the view files are for documents you want students to look at but not change. The idea behind this is students will be able to, like, say you have a document with some written information, like it's some written information. They can read it and then use the information. Edit the file is not as very useful, because that means any one student can edit the file and everyone sees those changes. The problem with that is usually, unless you have very small groups of students working in small groups, this is not a very useful feature in my opinion, because usually I don't need an entire class to edit one document, and then you have the duel over whose edits stick. Yes, you can go through and track every edit made, but it's just not as useful, at least the way I use it. Maybe for collaborative projects, or you're assigning a small assignment to several students and you want them to work in a single document, this is an easy way to do that. What I use for things a lot is make a copy for each student, and I'll give you some examples of how I use that in just a minute. And you can do this with pretty much any of the different types of documents, except for Forms, which I'll cover in a separate video. Now for some examples of what some different kinds of assignments look like, very basic ones. So this is a very simplistic one. The goal is to get information and organize it into a chart. And so to kind of give you an idea what this looks like, it's a New Deal's program chart. And what I've done is I've provided some materials, a couple YouTube videos, and then a website on the New Deal. And let's actually go in and edit this. This is what it looks like from the edit view. And essentially the idea is students use the information from these assignments to fill in a chart. And this is where I find using these charts to be very useful. When students are submitting an assignment, they could upload a document, but my preferred method is to give them a template to fill in. The reason for this is when you're going through grading student submissions, if you have every document laid out the same, it's very easy for you to look through and read over, okay, that answer, that answer, that answer, that answer. And that way you have a standard format. That way students you don't have the mix-up of students trying to upload documents that don't work or other things that aren't what they aren't supposed to be submitting. Instead, you just have simplistic templated charts. So I'm going to show you this one because this is arguably one of the more complicated templates I've built. This assignment is okay. It's basically it's a graphic organizer. It's for student reference, really. And what I did to make this chart work is I started with a blank document, a blank doc, and I created this chart using the document settings. And then I went through and I filled in some of the information so students kind of got an idea of, okay, this is what they want in this column, this is what's wanted in this column, this is what's wanted in this column. And then students would fill in the non-orange parts. And then when I was grading them, I could easily look through, and I already knew what I was in the chart built in, and then I could see what students added and go off of that information. This assignment is incredibly simplistic, low level, but it's a great way to kind of have a chart, reference chart for students to look at, okay, these are all the different programs. Let's go into another example. Oh, and each student gets a copy of this. I don't know if you saw that before, but this is in here. One additional detail, once you post an assignment, you can still edit it, but it's not as easy to edit. You can change the point values, but obviously it advises against that. So really, when you will build an assignment, you want to be done with it and then post it. You don't want to be adding stuff or changing stuff. Because when you create a new document in here, you can't give each student a copy if it's already been posted. Let's look at another example. So here's another example. This one uses some PDFs and a YouTube video. Essentially what I'm having the students do is looking at government of the 1920s, and then they're using these PDFs of like a short biography and a short reading. They're PDFs that the students can open up and look at and do. Actually, let's look at this in editing mode. And so essentially what this is here's the materials that they use, here's the instructions, and then each student gets a copy to fill in and answer. And this is what I mean by templating things out. Basically, this is a worksheet, which some might argue that's a bit simplistic, but it's a guided reading activity. The idea of this assignment is students are walked through the process of, okay, what do I need to pull out of this piece of document? What do I need to pull out of this piece of document? And you're teaching the students how to look for information within a certain area, which is very important in the information age. Most of the information age, going through information, your goal is to go through a mass of information and find very specific points to answer questions. But I've templated this out so that the instructions say fill in the answers in the boxes below. And so when I'm going through grading these, it's very quick to read student-written submissions. Because I can instantly see, okay, that's what they posted here, that's what they posted here, that's what they posted here. Sometimes I color code these, like I leave where they're typing white, and I put in, like with this one, I put in different colors to organize things. It kind of depends on you and how much time you have. The idea of these kind of assignments is they're relatively easy to build. They cover content, which is the goal, and that's why I like them. Now let's get into a bit more of a fun or open-ended assignment. Now this assignment doesn't fully exploit all of Google Classroom's functionality, but it provides more student choice. Essentially what this is it's a special topics assignment. It's a short essay, short writing piece assignment. Let's go into edit and see what it looks like. Now, normally when you do essays, you want to put in a rubric here, and the reason for that is, and I'll talk about it in the rubric video, is you can then click on different parts and students can instantly read, okay, I didn't do well on grammar, or I didn't do well on my topic sentence, things like that. But the way this is configured, it's designed so that you can issue one assignment that has choice, and then students can turn something in. And so what this one is you pick, the students are to pick one of these 3 articles, and they can look at each of the articles and make that decision. And then they read through the article, and then they answer the writing prompt at the end. And essentially, I've already built these PDFs. They were originally built to be printed off and distributed to students in class, but I converted it to online because of the ease of grading, and especially during the COVID closures, the fact that, well, paper copies aren't going to work. So let me show you what one of these looks like. Here we go. So right away when you open the document, you can see here, and the student could flip through all the different documents and choose which one they want to look at. These are pulled from a website. So let's see here. Let's go down. So I'm using the page down commands. You may notice you can open the document with different apps like Lumen, PDF, etc., etc. And essentially, what I did at the end is I added an assignment with a rubric here. And that way students know, okay, this is the writing prompt for this assignment. And then they can jump to a different one, page down, too far down, and it has a different one. And the reason for this is it allows me to issue one assignment, track one thing in the gradebook, but it has student choice involved in it. And the assignments, each of the writing prompts, each of the assignments are comparable to each other. And then to simplify student submissions, I made it so that each student gets a template copy. Let's crack that open and have a gander. And essentially, this tells you, please refer to the rubric. Please place down which article you wrote about, and then fill in the blank below. And so, sure, you could have students upload their own documents, but in this setup, they don't have to think about that. And this kind of leads me to one of the last things I want to talk about with assignment design. Computers can do incredible things. You can do all kinds of different engaging assignments, but some things you need to consider when you're designing assignments is, one, does the assignment work? Have the students dealt with this kind of thing before? Can they follow the instructions to complete, submit, and upload the assignment? Because if you're doing remote learning, for example, some students might get frustrated and give up, or they'll claim their computer broke. And so you want to make sure that your assignments are fully functional. This isn't the video game industry where you can release a broken version and tell them, oh yeah, I'll patch it later. Students don't appreciate that with their grades. But you want to keep your assignments functional. You want to make sure that they're relatively easy to turn in and that they're content focused. The method of delivery can be engaging and entertaining, but you really need to consider at the end of the day, am I teaching what I'm setting out to teach? And is the assignment addressing that need? And so when you're designing these assignments, I use a lot of templates. I use a lot of standardized instructions under the argument that students appreciate standardization because all the students, they want to know how to do something, they want to know how to turn it in, and how to get credit for it. And then they can, and then if all those things are given, then they can focus on the learning itself, as opposed to, I spent 10 hours trying to get my computer to turn this out. Do you think they're going to remember the assignment that you issued them? Do you think they're going to remember the content? No, they're going to remember the troubleshooting and come up with some creative ways of describing what they had to suffer through. So my recommendation with assignments is standardization, taking the time to write good instructions on how to do them, because by the end, you can see the instructions are optional. I could have left this blank because students have already reached the point where they've done this type of assignment a number of different times. The topics, the content changes, but the methods of turning it in are relatively straightforward, and they figure it out towards the end. And you'll notice I didn't use the originality reports in this one here because I kind of used them all up on the previous assignments. Anyways, but I hope this Google Assignments tutorial helps. You can do a lot more with this program than what I'm showing you, but I'm intending these tutorials for teachers who may not have a lot of time, or they may not have a lot of time to test things. Because you can do more complicated assignments if the students have had a chance to get familiar with the system. And so a lot of this stuff is going to be your first generation, your first try at getting the classroom to work. Because students want the classroom to work. They don't want to spend all their time trying to get it to work. Neither should you want to spend all your time getting it to work. So with all that being said, I hope this helps, and until later.